It's 2026 and you spent 40 hours on a strategy deck, and a 4-line AI prompt did it better in 4 seconds. The future of work is not a PowerPoint anymore. It's a math problem, and most people are getting the answer wrong. Right now, somewhere in your company, a leader is calculating human capital ROI, which means they're running the numbers on whether keeping you on the payroll makes more sense than letting a machine do your job. Most workers have no idea this is happening. Today, we talked to the woman who helped build these systems from the inside. Stela Lupushor worked at IBM, PwC, and Fidelity. She holds a patent pending in social sentiment analysis, and she spent her career turning this complicated math of workforce strategy into something that real leaders can actually use. She calls herself a chief reframer. She takes the way you think about work and flips it, so you stop being a cost on a spreadsheet and start being the return on someone's investment. By the end of the episode, you'll have a formula to prove your value before anyone questions it. Stela, welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Stela, you grew up in Moldova and graduated with a degree in mathematics and computer science back in 1993. That's a long road to becoming someone who reframes how the global workforce thinks about itself. What were your goals back then? And did any part of you see this AI revolution coming?
There were many things I wasn't seeing at that time. It was still a Soviet Union regime when I went to university. And by the time I graduated, the former Soviet Union fell apart. I was a student, part of the demonstrations and transition to the new reality, post-Soviet Union reality. So going into the school, I was preparing myself for just a job to make an income and have ability to financially sustain the family. And by the time I graduated, the world opened up. And I was really lucky. One of my school colleague at that time, that eventually ended up being my husband, said, hey, there is this project that Pricewaterhouse is running in the US. Do you want to apply? We have a lot of openings. So that was the beginning of my global career and opportunities that opened up for me. And of course, there was no vision of AI at that time. There was no idea that I will ever end up in HR because I graduated from a very technical background, and that was the direction I was going. And a few countries later, I was sent to study SAP HR because the whole office was planning to implement at one of the largest clients, the SAP system. And they weren't planning to implement the HR module, but they needed somebody with the knowledge of, for the purposes of integration. So that's how I ended up in HR. And for me, it just opened up a whole different universe because I could see myself. I could relate to the impact I was having through the work I was doing. I could see how performance management can be a force for good or a force for disengagement and ultimate resignations. I could see how employee experience makes a huge difference on the quality of the work products, but also on quality of relationships at work. So to me, that exposure to HR, not just the operational, tactical things that HR does, but also the strategic impact it can have on the workers, opened up my next phase of career that I am still in and I'm still passionate about.
HR and math is the way I think of it to some degree, right? How to calculate people, and human capital specifically is a term that I don't know everybody is familiar with, but it's something back when I was in college and econ in particular, we talked about quite a bit. And yeah, and it's for me a fascinating study, how people work, why they work, what's the value behind it, all that fun stuff. So we're definitely going to get into that, more of that today.
But what's interesting about what you're saying, math and HR, those typically weren't affiliated in any way for a long period of time. It was always about personnel. It was about paying people, giving benefits, or all sorts of other things typically HR is known for, more of a compliance function and the problem with the rest of the HR responsibility was very intangible, right? You cannot really put a number on employee well-being or on investing in development of people because you don't know, are they going to stay with us? Are they going to perform? Will this give us the return? And the analytics evolution of people analytics in general gave HR really that power that they can now attribute quantifiable outcomes to the investments that you're making in the employee experience, in the HR efficiency, in the ability to connect the business outcomes to the people outcomes. That kind of was the opening opportunity for HR to really step into that business partner role as a just as important as somebody in finance, because the finance will tell you the financial outcomes and financial goals that you're accomplishing, and the HR can then link those to the human capital ones.
It can help definitely tell you some of the why behind those numbers and how they relate to the person, not just the spreadsheet. It has some fun facts because I maybe have heard of Moldova before, Stella, but just some things that I was able to dig up here. Moldova, which you mentioned, Eastern European country, former Soviet Union, has a varied terrain, including forests, rocky hills, vineyards. Its wine region is Nistriana. Is that Nistriana? Does that sound right? Or
there are a lot of wineries in the middle of the country, but just for context, the country itself, it's about 150 miles by 100 miles wide. So it's not that much of a territory. And towards more the south and the middle of the country, there are a lot of wineries. There are a lot of, it was known for a very long time, but during the Soviet time, when the whole version of prohibition we had, there was a lot of damage done to that industry. So the vines themselves were ripped apart. The production, the traditions, everything got decimated. So it took a long time for that to recover and come back. But now a lot of the new technologies, the new way of growing and fermenting and processing and distributing, I think it really brought that industry back to Moldova. But it was a sad part of the story where that almost disappeared, unfortunately.
Lots of history there. As I was thinking it, just my vision of it was similar to what we're here in the Bay Area. So we have Napa, which is a wine region. And I don't know, just the fact that there was that wine synergy popped out to me. And fun fact, though, that I pulled up is that they do hold the Guinness World Record for the largest wine collection in the world, over 1.5 million bottles. So that's exciting, stored underground. And then along with that, Stella, highest alcohol consumption. Moldovans are ranked among the world's largest consumers of alcohol, largely due to their rooted wine culture. Fun facts.
Know that. Good to know.
Cool. And then also one more thing, which was sounded exciting, was 2 Christmases. Many Moldovans celebrate Christmas twice, on December 25th and again on January 27th. So you've got a lot of wine and then double Christmases. Sounds like a lot of party going on there.
It starts somewhere in early November and just goes till almost March 8th when Women's Day happens. But
Great.
At the same time, Moldovans also are known for their work ethic. It's one of the most hardworking, at least growing up, that was obvious to me. And one of the largest exports was also the human capital from Moldova. There are a lot of citizens who left and migrated to different parts of Europe, to US. There's a huge diaspora here in the US as well of Moldovans. So out of the small, tiny little piece of land, I think a lot of people making an impact where they can.
Really cool. All right. You described yourself as a recovering corporate employee. So what was the specific moment, the meeting, the project, or the decision where you looked around and said, the traditional model of work is officially broken?
I wish it was just one defining moment. I think it was an accumulation of a lot of annoying little things that just keep piling on you. The way I typically describe the attrition, it doesn't happen overnight, right? It happens in paper cuts. First time something happens, you don't pay attention. Then second time, it's annoying. And then it just keep piling on until you say, okay, this is it. I'm not I can no longer tolerate the condition. So it's similarly to the environment in which HR, frankly, also has a huge role at setting up. If you think about the system of organization, right, it starts with whatever the mission or the pursuit that the business leaders want to have. Let's say we want to become the AI native or an AI first organization. So they'll appoint the chief AI officer. They will get a budget. They will get some hierarchy or empowered to build their own hierarchy. They will define the decision-making process that goes up and down. They will put processes in place that will support the decision-making. They will then create job descriptions and vacancies to place people with those performance goals that comply with the approval and decision making. And then you end up with a very rigid way of operating that puts people into very narrow buckets where, despite of the big overarching goal and strategy, you still end up doing a lot of things at the bottom, and sometimes they make no sense, right? Like, why do you need to approve something that it doesn't have any ramification? There is no risk exposure, there's no regulation that requires it. It's mostly for control. Or why are you forcing, and let's make it more modern, why are you forcing people to come to the office 5 days a week when everybody realized how effective they can be when they work remotely or maybe in a hybrid environment, and they can be trusted to be adults and perform well, as opposed to being under the surveillance and monitoring, even though that manager might not even be in the same office. They still want to know that you're at the office, even though that may come at a 2-hour commute each way per day and lost 4 hours of potential productivity too. So to me, a lot of the challenges that the corporate environment creates is under the flawed assumption that it will give the leadership opportunity to control what's really not controllable, right? Because if you put processes in place, if you put procedures and protocols and ways of enforcing that performance, people are going to behave. But let's face it, humans are very difficult to control, right? Who is going to say, tell me what I need to do? Rarely, right? Maybe they will tell you to face, but they will do whatever they want anyway at the end of it. So the challenge, I think, for the modern era, especially with newer, younger generations coming into the workplace, is to really let go of some of that control and command and empower people. Because if you think about the talent or the proximity to your client, those people know what needs to get done and how it needs to get done. As long as they understand what is expected of them, what are they going to be measured on, how success is defined, give them the tools and give them the freedom to address those problems. And magic may happen. You never know.
Yeah. I like that. That tension is critical in terms of where we're at right now, what the future would look like. It's a massive reshaping or reframing that would need to be done because there's been so much infrastructure built around this process of the way things have been for the last, however far it goes back, as far as the current system being broken. Something that stands out to me in particular is just like the political component of work and how it is inefficient. And so many times people probably could solve this problem much better if you gave them the latitude to do it, but we've got to figure that out. Yeah. So back to the broken system, Stela, you've said that HR, it needs to be broken into two or maybe even blown up entirely. Why is the corporate system still fighting so hard to protect a structure that is clearly not working for most people?
Let's start the reframing process. Maybe we shouldn't really go as dramatic as blown up, right? It's really about the specialization. So if you think of HR, there are two very distinct skills and capabilities required. One, you need to pay people on time. You need to make sure their benefits are administered correctly. You need to make sure you protect the data and there's no exposure of PII, personal identifiable information externally. You need to make sure that the offices are secure and your workforce is able to feel they can perform the work they need. You need to make sure it's healthy, it's safe, there are fairness in how they compensate. So there are the basic HR activities that have been around for a long time. They're well documented. There are good routines there. There are a lot of good system enabling that. That's just HR operations that requires very different skills than the strategic work that HR also has been tasked with. You need to grow your talent. You need to develop. You need to inspire. They need to be engaged. They need to be giving all the discretionary effort. And a lot of that is very distinct capabilities and a lot less precise in terms of what the outcomes need to look like. And we are forcing this function that already has a lot of things to manage and orchestrate to be everything under the sun with very limited budget and increasingly lower and lower budget every year. Obviously, you will not be able to accomplish that if you're measuring everything based on tangible results, right, that we talked about earlier. There are a lot of intangible things that need to be quantified. There are a lot of skills difference that need to be nurtured and developed, and a lot more freedom. We see in some organizations, more progressive organizations, a lot of the collaboration between the IT and HR around employee experience, around adoption of AI. That's not your traditional HR training. And the program that I'm an adjunct at NYU, it's called Human Capital Analytics and Technology. And that's exactly the type of education that we need to bring to the broader HR community, because it's a different skill set, different mindset, different tool set that you need to incorporate into what you do. And it doesn't come easy to HR.
The mindset you're talking about is the integration of technology or AI with HR. Is that's what you're saying? Is not the what is the key component there? I guess you could recap that.
It's the transformational capabilities and strategic work that HR does, which is very different than pure HR operations, right? So HR had to figure out how to work with the rest of the business to transform the organization into a digital company, right? How do you find new skills? How do you transform what work is and how it's being defined and how it's being measured and then how it's being evaluated in your performance management, which is not really HR processes. They are HR in support of the business transformation.
Okay, got it.
Similarly with AI. Yeah.
Is this an accurate statement? Like HR is the traditional role is more of an operational function, keeping the lights on type of role, but they're now being tasked with actually developing strategy around the future. So yeah, they're having to design systems where that has not been their traditional role.
And there's always been the case where you would have this bifurcation, right? You would have traditional back office staff that HR is the expert and should continue to be the expert versus the rest of it. How do you plan your workforce? How do you incorporate some of these business decisions into the workforce implications? How do you reimagine how do you move to hybrid work? What that does to both employee ability to be productive versus the business to be able to operate and continuity of the business. So those are very different skills that traditional HR is being developed when they go to HR school.
I'm curious, back towards that operational side, I think the typical employee probably that isn't in HR often interacts with HR when they're onboarding, when they're offboarding, when there's an issue. So more of that operational side of HR. I'm curious, the tools that you've built and what you've worked on, does it really have an emphasis on that, on the how to navigate challenging situations, or is that still very people heavy, right? The summary there is, are the tools that you developed, did they deal with those at all? Or is it more just along the lines of, do we have the right amount of resources allocated to projects? Are we being compliant? Are we going to deal with the issues of the future?
Maybe the easier way to grapple, because this is something I have to really ingrain in my students, and it takes a while to grasp. So think of how customer experience became a thing, right? There was a point in time when the companies all had the control over whatever they were doing, and who cared about customer experience? And then suddenly there's this whole new of technology first companies that figure out that customer is right. If we can make it easier for the customer, it'll get them to the purchasing decision. They'll come back and bring their money. It will create a loyal relationship over a period of time. But that required to move from, we're building a tool that serves us as a company to maximize whatever we are trying to make, be that money or usually, and minimize the costs and investments we're making, towards more of a, what is the customer experience and how we can reduce the friction point for them such that we can get them to that decision, the purchasing decision, faster. It was a very different mindset that then created new professions, right? You have product managers, you have user experience designers, you have analytics to demonstrate the impact your changes are making. And you have then companies like Apple, who are known for these experience design, Amazons, who completely transformed the industries with that mindset in mind. The same type of thinking needs to come to the world of work. So we typically think of HR and their processes and the tools as a way to make HR more efficient. Right? I have a talent acquisition system that helps me put people through the funnel much faster. And it's really about making HR do more for less, as opposed to saying what it's like to be a candidate and go through that funnel. How are you discovering the company? How are you experiencing their career site? How easy it is for you to apply for that job? Do you hear back from them, or are they ignoring you and you ghosted? Do you go to your first interview and the person doesn't show up? Like a lot of little things that form your impression of what it's like to work with that company, and that will influence your decision whether or not you want to come or not. So from operational perspective, right, the things that typically people want to spend the least amount of time with HR, those are the operational stuff in the back end. Those need to be done. We need to keep the lights on and make sure that we don't have to touch you. You see the check at the end of the month, or you get your orientation on time, you get your equipment on time, or you get yourself offboarded on time, as opposed to the rest of the stuff that it's more experience driven. It requires very different skills and different tooling, right? You need to have experienced designers do observation of what it's like to be a worker coming into the office. By the time you get to the office, you probably had 2 hours stuck in traffic. Your badge is not working, or you forgot it at home and the security doesn't want to let you in. You come in your usual mobile office that you sit at. Somebody else is took over that, and you don't have space because they are over capacity. They didn't plan for the number of people that are going to come into an office. So by the time you sit down to do something, you're already frustrated to no limits. And what type of experience are you going to have and then inflict on your customers if this is how you're being treated as a worker? That type of HR transformation and mindset is very different, and you need analytics capabilities to measure that employee experience and understand where the friction points are, and then knowing how to build the business case that says, here's where that first or second or third paper cut happens. If we can only invest 5% of whatever spend on improving this experience, we will reduce our attrition by 10%. And that 10% can equate to millions of dollars ultimately. Now you have a very different conversation with your finance people and whoever decides on the budget, because you can demonstrate with evidence, with data and facts, the impact your intervention is going to have on the bottom line. They may not care about the adjacent intangible things like employee well-being and lower stress level and better collegiality. That'll be over and above everything else from business perspective that matters.
From your experience, are you seeing that companies are becoming more thoughtful on that side of HR? Like their approach in particular, they're definitely spending more time and interest in figuring out the employee experience, what makes them stick, what makes them happy. Are you seeing that trend happening, and they're making those investments?
Definitely. Even investments in the actual titles, you see a lot more openings of people with that design and experience mindset. Previously, HR only cared about engagement, and that was just a self-reported survey with whatever people felt on that day to respond. Now you see a lot more localized research and analysis based examination of the experience and making very deliberate choices and investments in collaboration with others, right? You collaborate with your space planning because you need to design for different inflows of talent or people. You need to reimagine the space, the physical space itself, because you need to have spaces for quiet work and focused work as opposed to being open floor for everyone. You have a lot more collaboration with IT because the work can happen from anywhere, not just the office or home. How can you provide access to the same tooling and productivity enhancements that you would get at the office such that people can perform that work in whatever, I don't know, the client side or on the island if they decided to go have vacation and they decided to take 1 hour, sneak out of the family for 1 hour to go fix something and do something. So there is a different engagement with the rest of the organization that has influence over the worker experience, and that through the job openings and the type of projects that HR now is doing and higher investment, because now you have a lot of case studies and examples and white papers now finally that are being written. So HR is finally paying attention, maybe not as fast as we hoped, but we'll take it.
And I always thought that there was not enough emphasis on retention in particular, whether it's employees or whether it's your cell phone company that doesn't care about you as a repeat customer. You're making such a heavy investment to attract that talent. Retention, it just seems a no-brainer, but somewhere it got lost along the way, and that employee experience, unfortunately, not being great is what generally makes people consider making a move. I know a lot of the large enterprises are spending and investing in that. I'm hoping small, medium-sized businesses are starting to understand and appreciate that better. But yeah, I agree, that's critical in order to really to have a strong workforce in the future.
One thing not to forget, that even after people leave, they still have a relationship with you as a brand, right? They may continue to hold stock. They may decide to purchase your products or not. They may decide to refer their friends, whether that's a good place to work or not. So the assumption that you get rid of people in the first place, it's awful, but then that's it, they're out of your life for good. That's incorrect. Treating people well, regardless of what's happening, I think it's important, no matter what.
Yep, I agree. Creating irreplaceable value. Stella, data shows that 32% of workers are hiding their AI use from their leaders. You might call this shadow AI, which means that employees are using tools the company has not approved because it's the only way that they can keep up, such as using ChatGPT on their phone or their personal computers. Is this a massive security problem, or is it the only thing that's keeping them really productive right now and giving them the ability to keep up?
It is both. And it's huge security exposure and a lot of implications for the business unless there is good investment in education and governing, because a lot of times people just don't necessarily think that, hey, if I paste the the file with employee compensation, it just stays between me and the chatbot. That a lot of this data actually it's beyond going beyond the relationship you have with the bot. And there are settings that you need to be mindful of. There are anonymization techniques that you need to put in place. So a lot it's about really educating before the exposure could take the company into a very different, much riskier territory. But at the same time, people are being told every day, you must, or otherwise, or else. And at the same time, some of the AI tools that are being provided internally are subpar. Because of that risk mitigation, there's a lot of limitations put in place that you cannot do this. There's no memory, there's no opportunity to save or download, like a lot of things that are unnaturally restricting the full potential of a lot of these tools that then force people to go use their personal tools or access to the through the personal devices, which doesn't help anyone ultimately. Instead of saying, look, we can create a sandbox and for a period of time, we give access to everything for people and we educate them what are the norms, how to behave, what type of things they need to be mindful of, what's a no, how do you evaluate the quality of the output? Because a lot of skills that you need to interact with the AI it's like manager roles, right? You need to know how to delegate and which tasks need to be delegated. You need to know how to evaluate what you get back, how to scrutinize the outcome, because a lot of stuff may not be relevant or may be inaccurate or completely be obvious that it's AI generated. You need to give people the space and time to embrace it effectively before you unleash the full potential onto more business specific use cases. And
Yep.
it's not like people want to maliciously do any of this stuff. It's more just like if I can do something, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, in 4 minutes or 4 seconds, I would take that shortcut because then I can spend my time making an extra phone call to that customer or fixing the extra bug, whatever it is that it's on my plate, that it just makes me more productive and fit more within one day of workday.
Yeah, two takeaways from that is, for one, which you mentioned, which I wrestle with all the time, is that AI makes a ton of mistakes. So you do have to manage it, just sometimes frustratingly, maybe even more than an experienced employee. So they might have the logic and understanding. Somebody made an example recently that I thought was valid, saying, what if you had somebody who was an expert in doing or somebody that had PhD level of education, but didn't have domain knowledge in particular in a specific space. So they don't know anything about HR, but they're a genius. Or you had somebody that had 15 or 20 years of experience doing HR in particular, and you were looking to develop an HR strategy. Who would you hire? And the answer, I think, is pretty straightforward. For most, you would hire that person who has the expertise because they're going to be able to understand and learn and hit the ground running much faster. They've had to deal with all these challenges, headaches, bottlenecks along the way. That expert or the Albert Einstein could figure it out. It's just going to be a bigger learning curve for them ultimately. And that is my experience working a lot of times with AI, is just a lot of beating my head against the wall thinking, why are you not getting it? But having to just go back and forth and train it. And ultimately you're hoping to get to a good product and a good result. But then maybe the next time you fire up that AI tool or the agent, they just decided they wanted to sleep in that day and are not processing information the way that they were last time. Hopefully that will get resolved. But yeah, it makes a lot of mistakes. And then just the other point, again, back to the personal data component. And a call out, I think, just again for the audience and different employers is, which maybe people don't know already, or if they don't know already, yeah, when you use your own device, you put information into a server that is a computer that somebody else owns. You don't own that. So you put your personal information into that, you put your company's information into it, and now somebody else has access to that. And what they choose or don't choose to do with it is really up to them within boundaries. So I would just think of it that way, right? If you're on the side of a company that's not investing in training and or giving your staff tools in order to use and or leverage these AI tools, just know that they are probably doing and putting information out there that is a huge risk point for you. And again, to that employee side, be cautious about what you put out there. I'd really love to know personally just more about what were like the key critical challenges that you guys were trying to solve for. Tell us more about with some of these tools, the enterprise tools that you built around human resources, capital management. What were the goals of the research that you were doing? And in particular, what issues were these tools looking to solve? And could you provide some feedback on what were some interesting takeaways and things that you learned along the way?
I would summarize the tools and analytics capabilities that I've built over my career was mostly about myth busting, right? How can you answer questions that typically there is a perception inside the organization about what the answer is? And then we would go collect the data, figure out how to answer that question, that many times we dispel that myth. So a couple of examples, right? We know, or the general perception is, people who are hired through referrals are much better candidates than those who are hired directly from the market. When you do the analysis and look at the level of granularity and segment the data, you discover that actually there is a relationship between who is referring you and the level of the person you're referring to. So if, for example, the proximity, so if you're a manager and you're referring somebody for the job one level or two level below, your referral indeed is going to be much better. As opposed to if you're very high up in the organization and you're referring somebody really at the lower level, the quality of that referral is not going to be good. Because and if you start thinking, it makes sense, because people who are further removed from the actual job, they will have very little context understanding of what's required and the skills and capability needed. And they may make the referral, but that person may be a misfit, as opposed to if you're closer to that, you'll know exactly what's needed. And therefore, no, this is not the right job for you, or this is not the right person for it. Similarly, with other analytics projects, right? Back at IBM, we built a sentiment analysis tool, which it was way ahead of its time, but in essence was ingesting internal chatter on the internal social network of 340,000 employees around the world, combining it with the demographic detail, anonymizing it at the point of collection, and then storing anonymous information that we then can say, what do people in general talk about? What are the major topics that come up? Are people talking in positive or negative terms? And it was more of a research project than anything else, but we built that infrastructure. And it was already after I left IBM that there was an example where I said, this is exactly why we built it. At that time, somebody in HR at IBM declared that Uber is no longer going to be reimbursed. And one of the consultants went on the internal network and complained and said, look, life of a consultant shouldn't be made more difficult than already is. We travel all the time. Why are you making it yet another barrier to our experience? That post got liked, tagged, reposted, like it got picked up by the system and saying there is an emerging event here happening, got escalated to the CHRO, and in a matter of 16 hours, the policy got reversed. So it's a very different way of addressing problems before they become something that it's blowing up in your face. So it allows the leadership to get in front of the issue, but it also allows the voice of the employees to be heard. It's not something that HR would typically get involved or would be part of traditional HR operations. These are the experimental strategic areas. And yes, building analytics capabilities at that time was, we were working with researchers. We were requiring very different infrastructure. We had to go through all sorts of privacy approvals around the world, work with Works Council. It was a product development more than anything else. That's not something that HR typically does, right? But it allowed us to create an analytics-driven way of detecting signals that are happening inside the organization, such that you can create those interventions and improve the worker experience and listen and give them the agency to influence it in a positive way.
It almost sounds like you were building an internal social media network that it's listening to what topics are trending within the environment and bringing things to the company's attention if it's a risk point or if it's something if it's something that needs to be changed. And that was a cool story that you mentioned about Uber in particular and how it did have an impact and it was able to switch that policy. Without it and without getting that kind of real-time feedback, that wouldn't have been possible and probably would have dragged down the employee experience that much more. Sounds like you built something cool there, Stela.
Analytics and math in HR it's really interesting space, and I think it provides a very different sense of accomplishment to anyone who's getting into that space, because you can see directly how what you're doing has a positive impact on people. And there's no better feeling than that.
Math doesn't lie. If you're still holding on to a job title as your safety net, you're already part of the old system. But if you can prove your human capital ROI, build the skills to work alongside AI agents and show your company exactly what you bring that a machine cannot, you are not just a worker, you're an architect. Stela, we talk a lot about being an architect and not just a worker. Looking in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, what's your specific picture of what the future of work looks like?
10 years is too far. We've all learned that sometimes a week it's too far too, but
nobody likes the 10-year one. Nobody does, Stela.
It's too far.
But I like it. I think it's a good stretch, but go ahead. Sorry.
We need to talk maybe in May again, because I am running a capstone project at NYU, and one of the work stream is working on that next 10-year horizon. So maybe they will discover something that I can share with your audience. But if I am to think realistically of what might happen, we can assume technology will move fast, and we can assume that the way it works today is the worst it will ever be. We can assume that the organizations will continue to use the AI as an excuse to reduce their dependence on workforce, because that's been the case for millennia, right? Organizations have always tried to reduce the variability of humans and therefore have a sense that they have control over their production and outcomes. But we can also assume that demographics is karma, and unfortunately there will be fewer and fewer working age population unless we figure out immigration and fertility rate. We can assume that people are going to live longer and healthier and will want to continue to stay engaged, but maybe not at the full capacity that traditional we have. So we'll need to really rethink what is work and how you define it. What is the workplace where the work gets done? Who the workers are, because it's not just regular employees or contractors. There will be teams of people. There will be teams of people with AI. There will be agents performing the work on behalf of your organization. More importantly, what the companies will need to reimagine is that worth, the value exchange between the workers and the organization, and make sure that it's fair, because that will be the differentiating factor. This is how you'll be able to attract people to your company, the top talent that you're seeking. This is how you'll be able to make sure they're motivated to bring their best talent to the work environment and help the organization accomplish whatever the business outcomes that you're going after.
Yeah, agree. It's going to be a huge revolution what happens over the next 3, 5, 10 years. All of what you said, I think, is accurate. And these are all challenges that employers are being tasked with and employees are being tasked with. And my advice is just, again, to try to think, what does that future look like and how can we be best suited in order to be successful in it? Because it is changing rapidly, lots of innovation, but lots of excitement too. For anyone who wants to go deeper into your work or connect with you at Reframe, where is the best place for them to go?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of my thoughts and work there. You can write me an email, Stela with one L, at reframe.org, WORK, or just find me on my website, www.reframe.org.
Great. We will drop all those links in the show notes as well. And thanks for helping the audience stay unlocked.
Thank you
Don't be a
so much.
stranger.
It was a pleasure.
All right.